if I said Steve 45 plaid shirt, like who's in your head without me giving any additional information? It's probably not a disabled person. You know, it might not be a person of color. So breaking those patterns of how we think about what immediately comes to mind for a particular role, like the neighbor, you know, who are you seeing in your head? The wife, the librarian. Very often these are not disabled people. And to some of the points that were made earlier, when some of you guys were sharing stories, there's a lot of value in being in a diverse community like LA, because we do have people like that in our lives. But in middle America, that might not necessarily be the case. So I think it takes some conscious effort sometimes to break those patterns in our own heads. And for disabled characters, I think it's particularly hard, because the way that script reads happen now, if for example, David in a wheelchair rolls into the room and you're a script reader and you don't typically see disabled characters on screen, you're immediately wondering, how do you get in that wheelchair? How does he feel about being in that wheelchair? The wheelchair must play a role in this story somehow. Like maybe by the end he'll walk and he'll feel better about himself or whatever, right? Like these are all things that we have deeply subconsciously packaged within ourselves. When in reality, David was just here to get a cup of coffee, and this is how David gets around. So it doesn't need to be explained, but it has to happen at a script level, a casting director level. We need more disabled people working on the other side of the desk in development as execs, just so that all this stuff is more normalized. Because I've had, in development experiences, I've had really weird conversations with execs who don't understand even like the basics of disability, or they feel like everything is so precious, you know. Whereas if there was a disabled person working on that side of the desk, it'd be helpful because there's a shorthand. So sometimes I'll encourage people that may want to be writers, like you could also be very valuable pursuing a career on the other side of the desk, because I need somebody to talk to without feeling like I have to give them a primer on you know, what disability is. 98% of writers' rooms in television do not have an upper level disabled person in them. And the upper levels are the folks that make all the decisions about what gets on screen and what stories are told and how they're told. So if you're almost nowhere at the upper levels, the odds are, and the lower levels, like staff writers, are really, as I said, are there to please the overall project. We're not there to like change the nature of television. So a lot of times at the lower levels, you're just trying to keep your head down and be nice and support what's already there. So we have to get more people into the upper level areas. And we have to change the way in which disability is spoken about, to the degree that it's spoken at all. So I think those are the two main areas where that change is essential. When I finished film school and I was going through my phase of like, oh, I gotta get a writer's assistant job, I also went to the DEI programs at various networks, and I said, who is someone I can chart a path behind? Where's another disabled creator in television? And they couldn't name any. And this happened at 2 different networks, and I remember thinking, this is arguably your job. I didn't say this out loud. These are those things that you keep to yourself.
Yeah.
If you're not thinking about this, then it's not getting thought about. So, but now we have, you know, Ryan O'Connell created Special, and he kind of circumvented the system by writing a book about his life and then getting that book made into a show. I don't have that kind of patience or discipline. There's Shoshana Stern and Josh Feldman, who are both deaf writers, created a show called This Close. They did that through the Sundance, like one of those indie Sundance programs. For a lot of disabled content, you really have, and I think for a lot of folks here too, like one of the things that is exciting and validating is that the game is changing. So there are a lot more indie ways to make something. And I think that's really valuable for folks that don't otherwise have connections. And so in some sense, the dream of I have to get on NBC to have my career mean something. I have to get on CBS. And I say this as someone on a CBS show. I'm very thankful to be there. But like there are other ways to do this. And that wasn't always the case before. It used to be, you had like 3 networks. Now you can pick up your phone and make something. There was a disabled writer on Speechless named Zach Anner, who he wasn't able to do the assistant route. And I think he had a YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel was noticed by Oprah, and that really helps. If you can work that out. And so he got staffed on Speechless because they didn't have any disabled writers on Speechless the first season. And then they found this guy on YouTube who was funny, and he didn't have TV experience, but that's a learnable skill. So they brought him in, and he was there for a couple of years and has done some other shows since. So you got to kind of like do an end run around the way things are typically made, because it's just not set up to accommodate certain life experiences. Animation circumvents all these like deep-seated bizarre concerns people have about disabled people on set. So if you think about like Family Guy, like, or the PUPSTRUCTION show that I just did, animation opens up more opportunities because you're just drawing the thing. You don't have to think about how somebody's going to get around. So, and I have mixed feelings about that. That's sad, but that's reality. Until we get more people in more spaces where they can think about this stuff. That's why I try to put myself in more and more environments to talk about it, because very often with disability, people are very receptive to it once it gets brought up, but they haven't thought about it at all before that. So they're like, oh, I never thought about why I never see this on TV, or oh, I never thought about how the ways in which this production might be less accessible than it could be. That only happens if a disabled person is there or an ally is there who's able to point out, oh, this is kind of, and realistically, like I've learned so much in my role at the Guild because I'm co-chairing a committee that has a lot of different disabilities in it. So I'm catching myself all the time, and I screw stuff up all the time. And you have to be willing to do that. I think people are afraid of making those mistakes or saying something that's going to be, taken the wrong way. But I have the privilege of being able to hear and see. And so sometimes when I'm running a meeting or it's on Zoom or something, I haven't necessarily set it up with those other needs in mind. And so I try to be more conscious now of thinking about those that might need what I have taken for granted.